After the wedding, everything will be ours.
What would you do if you overheard your soon-to-be stepmother whispering on the phone, "The wedding night will be his last"? And when you told your dad, he didn't believe you? The shocking truth is, kindness can be a mask. A smile can hide a murder plot. And if this 13-year-old boy hadn't acted fast, his father would be buried by now. This story is inspired by a real-life case in South Africa. I've reconstructed it with never-before-revealed details. You'll see how a kid exposed a perfect crime plan, how he used science and journalism to stop a killer, and how a wedding turned into a full-blown crime scene. The proof? A voice recording in a café, a wine glass turning purple with poison, a father collapsing in tears after realizing his son saved his life. If you're a parent, or if you've ever had a bad feeling about someone close, don't skip this video. It might just save a life. The walls were not empty. They had always held her face. A gentle face framed by a soft scarf, eyes steady, mouth caught in a half-smile that belonged to the past. Tonight, for the first time, the picture frame was gone. In its place, the light from a crystal lamp stretched across bare paint, and in that hollow space hung another image, bright, new, unsettling. Jabari froze in the doorway. His father's laughter rolled through the living room, warm and careless, a sound he had not heard in months, since the funeral. Yet the boy's eyes were locked on the new photograph. It showed a woman with perfect posture, lips painted in scarlet, her smile wide as though rehearsed. The smile was radiant, but her eyes were empty, dark, unlit like windows in an abandoned house. Adewale, tall and broad-shouldered, still carrying the gravity of a businessman who built his fortune from nothing, turned toward his son with pride that glimmered like fresh glass. "Jabari, meet Naledi. She will be with us now." The woman stepped forward. Her perfume was strong, floral with a sharp undercurrent that reminded him of crushed stems left too long in water. She bent her head in a practiced gesture of grace. Her dress, white with gold trim, caught the lamplight as if she had known exactly where to stand. Jabari swallowed, the taste of metal rising in his mouth. He could not take his eyes from the wall where his mother's face no longer shone. He tried to search for the old frame, perhaps hidden behind the armchair or resting by the mantel. Nothing. Only the new smile stretched wide, hiding something invisible. The night settled around them like a heavy curtain. Naledi moved through the house not as a visitor, but as if every step claimed the floorboards. Her hand brushed the dining table, the mantel, the shelves. She spoke with an ease that ignored boundaries. "This house has such fine bones," she said, voice sweet as syrup yet cutting with an edge. "It only needs a woman's touch." Adewale laughed again, his chest swelling with relief as though a long storm had finally ended. "See? I told you, son. She brings life back into these rooms." Jabari wanted to ask where the photograph of his mother had gone. The question trembled on his tongue but never escaped. Instead, he followed with his eyes as Naledi crossed the room and adjusted the curtains, pulling them wide open, though the night outside was black. Her reflection merged with the glass, a silhouette doubled in the darkness. She reached into her handbag, pulled out another framed picture, and without asking, placed it on the coffee table, herself again, smiling that same hollow smile. Jabari's chest tightened. This was not how guests behaved. Guests asked before touching. Guests did not place their own images in homes that belonged to others. He felt a sting, like nettles brushing his skin. The air carried the scent of roasted spices from the kitchen, though no pot was boiling. Naledi walked toward the stove and inspected the pots and pans. She opened drawers, closed them softly, as if measuring what would soon be hers. Adewale's eyes softened, drinking in her every movement. He seemed lighter, almost boyish, shadows of grief erased by her presence. Jabari saw something else, an intruder who smiled too wide, who stepped too firmly, who replaced too quickly. The evening stretched on. Naledi insisted on serving tea, though she had only arrived hours before. The cups clinked gently, porcelain against saucer. She poured with precision, steam rising, the smell of black leaves filling the room. Adewale accepted his cup, looking content for the first time since death had cracked their home open. Jabari accepted his cup too, hands trembling, though the liquid burned his throat with every sip. Silence grew thick, broken only by Naledi's voice. She asked about the garden, about business partners, about redecorating the hallway with lighter shades. She suggested moving the heavy oak table to the opposite wall. She talked of curtains, carpets, of space needing brightness. Each word fell like a small nail hammered into place. Jabari stared at her face. He tried to find warmth there, something human beneath the polished mask. But her eyes kept slipping past him, cold and distant, as if he were only a shadow in the room. Later, when Adewale excused himself to take a phone call in his study, the house fell into a fragile quiet. Naledi remained seated, fingers gliding over the rim of her teacup. She turned slowly, her gaze meeting Jabari's at last. The boy's breath caught. Her smile widened, lips glistening, but her eyes did not change. They stayed hollow, dark as unlit windows, and for one fleeting moment her face looked like a mask stretched too tight. Then she laughed softly, the sound brittle like glass ready to shatter. "Your father deserves happiness," she said. The words were smooth, but they dropped heavy. Jabari pressed his lips together, unable to answer. His hands tightened around his teacup until the porcelain threatened to crack. From the hallway, Adewale's voice carried. He was still on the phone, cheerful, discussing business. Naledi rose, walked to the wall, and straightened her own portrait. She leaned close to the frame, gazed at herself, and whispered something Jabari could not hear. The boy's stomach twisted. The room seemed smaller, the air tighter. He looked again for his mother's photograph and finally spotted it, pushed into a corner behind a chair, half hidden in shadows. Dust clung to the glass, though it had hung cleanly hours before. He wanted to cry out, to drag the picture back to the wall, but his voice stayed locked in his chest. The front door creaked with a gust of wind. Naledi moved toward it as though answering a silent call. She paused by the threshold, smoothed her dress, and glanced back at Jabari. For the briefest moment, her smile fell away, and what remained was a look sharp and calculating, as though she measured not the boy, but the future she intended to control. Then the smile returned, bright and false, and Adewale walked back into the room, phone in hand, laughter still on his lips. He saw none of it. Jabari lowered his eyes, heart pounding. When bedtime came, he retreated to his room but could not sleep. The house felt altered, claimed. Every creak in the floor, every whisper of curtains belonged to someone else now. He lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying Naledi's eyes over and over. In his chest grew a question that had no answer yet. Who was this woman who smiled so wide but never with her eyes? The night deepened. Rain tapped against the window, soft at first, then harder. Shadows shifted along the walls. Jabari finally rose from bed and tiptoed to the corner where his mother's picture had been left in the dark. He lifted it carefully, brushing the dust away with his sleeve. The glass reflected his young face beside hers. For a moment, warmth surged back into him, but it was fragile, fleeting. He carried the frame to his desk and set it upright where moonlight could fall across it. Outside, the storm grew louder. Inside, his father's new fiancée's laughter still drifted faintly from the guest room, light but hollow, seeping through the walls. Jabari sat motionless, staring at his mother's eyes in the photograph, feeling the ache swell inside his chest. He tried to breathe slowly, but the breath snagged, heavy with fear he could not yet name. He whispered into the quiet, though no one could hear. "She doesn't belong here." The clock ticked steadily. The air thickened with the scent of Naledi's perfume, lingering from the hall. The boy pressed his forehead against the cool glass of the frame and closed his eyes. Beneath his ribs, a seed of dread rooted itself. He knew, though he could not explain why, that the smile hanging on the wall was not a gift, but a warning. And as the storm raged beyond the windows, Jabari understood that the house he once knew had changed forever. The house was still, but Jabari's eyes flew open. He lay frozen beneath his blanket, heart thumping hard enough to rattle his ribs. Something had woken him. Not a dream. Not the wind. It was real. Soft footsteps crossing the floorboards below, a sound too precise to be the creak of wood alone. He strained his ears. The clock ticked on the wall. A car passed outside, its headlights casting fleeting shadows across his ceiling. Then came the sound again, measured steps, pausing, continuing. The air seemed colder now, pressing into his skin. He pushed himself upright, careful not to let the mattress groan beneath him. From below came a whisper, low, urgent, not his father's voice. He slipped out of bed, the chill of the wooden floor stabbing his bare feet. Moving like a shadow himself, he crept toward the door, opened it a fraction, and leaned out into the dark hallway. The whisper turned into words carried faintly upward, tangled in the air. A woman's voice, Naledi's. On the wedding night, it ends. He won't see another morning. Jabari's blood froze. He pressed against the wall, trying to steady his breath. There was silence. Then a man's voice, muffled but deep, threading through the stillness. The sound rose and fell as though wrapped in static. Jabari caught only fragments. One word cut clear as a blade. Mandla. The name echoed in his skull. He didn't know it, but something about the way Naledi said it, soft, familiar, intimate, made his stomach twist. He leaned farther, praying the wooden step beneath him would not betray him. Naledi's voice lowered again, trembling like a string pulled too tight. It has to be perfect, no mistakes. Once the glass touches his lips, everything is ours. Jabari's breath caught. He nearly stumbled back, but forced his body still. His mouth tasted of copper. Sweat beaded along his hairline, though the house was cool. Then, as if sensing the weight of her own words, Naledi changed. Her voice brightened, sweetened. So quickly it was like watching a mask snap into place. "Oh yes, darling," she sang into the phone, light and easy. "White satin, pure, elegant. It will match the veil perfectly." If anyone had walked into the room at that moment, they would have believed she was simply planning her wedding gown, nothing more. The softness in her tone, the laughter spilling like honey, it disguised the venom Jabari had just heard. He pressed his hand hard against his chest, trying to steady the thunder there. For a second, he thought he might be going mad. Who would believe him? A 13-year-old boy up in the middle of the night, claiming his father's bride-to-be, plotted his murder. His father, so desperate for light after months of grief, would laugh in disbelief. The voice below dropped into silence again. A door closed, soft but final. Jabari pulled back into his room, knees weak, hands trembling. He closed the door slowly, careful not to make a sound. The dark seemed thicker now, as though the shadows themselves listened. He sat on his bed, rocking slightly, palms pressed to his face. Images of his father flashed through his mind, laughing over tea, speaking warmly of Naledi, looking at her as though she were a gift from heaven. Jabari's stomach clenched. The contrast between that trust and the poison he had just overheard was unbearable. He turned toward his desk. His phone lay there, its black screen gleaming faintly with moonlight. He grabbed it with shaking fingers. Something inside him, fear mixed with desperate resolve, told him this was bigger than whispers in the night. Words faded, but recordings remained. He scrolled to settings, found the recorder, and pressed until a red light blinked alive. He set it to capture automatically whenever voices rose around it. It felt like reaching for a weapon, though all he held was a small piece of metal and glass. He placed the phone beside his bed, then sat in silence, listening, waiting. The house gave nothing more. Naledi's voice had retreated, swallowed by the night. Time dragged. The storm outside had thinned into drizzle, but every drop tapping the window made him twitch. He lay back, eyes wide open, staring at the faint glow of the clock hands. Each tick sounded louder now, as if the house itself measured not just minutes, but the danger closing in. Hours passed, or perhaps only moments. He couldn't tell. He drifted between half-sleep and raw alertness, hearing every shift of the house, every groan of beams, every sigh of wind. He thought of his mother's photo, now upright on his desk, bathed faintly in moonlight. Her steady eyes seemed to watch over him, but they also seemed to ask the question he could not answer. What will you do with what you know? The question gnawed at him. He imagined his father's face twisted in anger, refusing to believe. He imagined Naledi's eyes, cold and sharp, turning on him if she ever suspected. He imagined the stranger's name, Mandla, looming like a shadow, faceless but near. He clutched the blanket tight around his shoulders. His heart ached with a weight too heavy for his small chest. At last he whispered to the darkness, voice breaking, "Nobody will believe me. Nobody but the phone." He touched the recorder again, checked that the red light still blinked. It gave him a sliver of comfort, as though he had carved a notch of truth against the lies swirling around him. But even with that comfort, the dread would not leave. It coiled tighter, burrowing deeper. The house slept. His father's snores rumbled faintly from down the hall, steady, trusting. Naledi's silence stretched like a held breath. Jabari curled on his bed, eyes wet, the sound of his own heartbeat filling his ears. Morning would come. Sunlight would flood the walls. Naledi would smile again with that radiant, hollow smile. His father would laugh. The house would look the same as ever. Only Jabari would know the truth hiding beneath. He squeezed his eyes shut, chest burning, and pulled the blanket over his head. But he could not hide from what he had heard. He could not unhear the words that now lived inside him. The last thing he felt before sleep finally dragged him under was the cold weight of that secret pressing into him, heavy as stone. Afternoon light fell in shimmering bands across the living room, and for once the house breathed like it used to. Windows cracked open, a city breeze carrying dust and the distant fry of street food oil. Naledi moved quickly through the doorway, heels tapping, gold bracelets chiming in tiny metallic syllables. "I'll be late," she called toward the corridor without really turning her head. Her perfume lingered after her like a ribbon of cut flowers steeped too long in water. The front door closed. Silence pressed in. On the armchair, her leather bag waited like an animal that hadn't decided whether to bite. Jabari stood half-hidden behind the stair post, not daring to breathe. He had learned the house's breaths, the hum of the refrigerator, the rhythm of the old clock, the soft complaint of the east-facing window, so he knew when a new sound joined in. The bag had one, a whisper, almost a pulse. Or maybe that was just his own heart knocking at his ribs. He counted to 10, then to 20. The street stayed calm. A motorbike rushed past and faded. A pair of pigeons lifted off the fence with a clap of wings. His father was not home. He could picture him downtown in a conference room, tie straightened, grief kept neat and invisible. Naledi had left like a spark in silk. Now the house held its breath. He stepped forward. Each board remembered him and chose not to squeak. He had practiced this since nights became a place to listen, since he learned the difference between the song of a lyre and the lullaby of a kettle. The bag shone darkly in the light. Fine stitching, expensive. He could see his small reflection in the brass buckle, eyes too wide, mouth too tight. He hesitated. Not because he doubted what he had heard 2 nights ago through a cracked door. Not because the name Mandla and a promise of an ending hadn't soaked into him like rain. He hesitated. Because once you cross a line, the world remembers. Even if no one else sees, the world knows. His fingers touched the leather. Warm. Smooth. He slid the strap aside, listening. A car door slammed somewhere down the block. A laugh. The clock in the hall beat its steady, if you know cadence. He opened the flap. Inside, order. A wallet with a monogram. A compact mirror. Lipstick the color of a stop sign, a silk scarf coiled like a sleeping snake, a phone charger wrapped with ruthless precision. He lifted things gently, naming them in his mind with the same care he used when he spoke to his mother's photograph at night. Mirror, lipstick, scarf, charger, keys, a folded invitation with white embossing that shone like teeth. Then, tucked in a side pocket, something cool and glass kissed his knuckles. He pinched and lifted, a small vial, clear liquid inside, label scraped off, the edge of adhesive still catching at the light, the stopper sealed tight. No scent, at least not one his nose could find, but his skin recognized the chill of it the way a hand recognizes a blade before it sees it. His breath thinned. In the far room, a draft leaned into the curtains, and for a second, the whole house seemed to lean with it. He set the vial back in his palm and held it in the light. His mother's desk lamp, moved to the living room after the funeral, threw its honey glow across the glass and turned the liquid a pale, deceitful gold. He thought of tea, of the sound of porcelain against porcelain, of a laugh trained to sound like love. A word rose inside him, "Don't," and burned his throat as if it wanted to leap out and be law. He pulled his phone from his pocket. The camera opened to a black square that caught a shaky boy with too much knowing in his eyes. He steadied the frame on the vial, thumb hovering, then clicked. The sound was too loud. To him, it was a gunshot. In the rest of the world, nothing changed. He took another. One more. Different angles. His pulse wrote on his neck in ink the color of fear. He looked back into the bag, tracing invisibles. You don't carry this by accident. Not with the label gone. Not with the way your voice, late at night, can turn silk into rope. He swallowed. The phone was warm in his hand. The vial was cold. He glanced at the front door, at the window, at the place where his mother's photograph had once hung. It now sat on a side table like a finished sentence, moved to the margin. He told it silently, "I'm doing this for you, for him, for us." His fingers moved before his doubt could speak. He slid the vial into the inner pocket of his hoodie. It settled there with a weight far heavier than its size promised. The bag waited, open, a mouth expecting teeth back. He nudged the makeup and scarf into place exactly as before, retracing the route of his own guilt so no new path could be seen. He eased the flap down. The magnets met with a soft kiss. He breathed out. Then the doorknob turned. He didn't run. Running makes noise you can measure. He crossed the room on the muscles he'd built from not being believed. The hall smelled more strongly of her perfume as air pressure shifted with the opening door. The nearest hiding place, the linen closet, held too many brittle truths. Sheets that crackled like paper, a door that had always creaked on the 3rd inch. He veered. The wardrobe in the guest room, heavy, deep, full of the clothes Naledi had begun to hang as if this house had been hers for years. He slipped inside and pulled the door toward him just as the front door opened all the way, and her heels wrote a staccato signature on the entry tile. Darkness. Cloth brushing his face, cedar and starch, and that same floral perfume now suffocating at this close range. He eased his fingers against the inner shelf to keep from swaying. The wardrobe coughed a small wood-on-wood complaint as it settled. He held his breath until stars crackled at the edges of his sight. Naledi's voice floated, light and annoyed, like someone who had forgotten something that mattered only to her. The handbag rustled. "There you are," she murmured to an object. He couldn't tell which. Keys chimed. The click of the compact snapping open. A sigh. A pause. Her steps crossed into the guest room. He sensed her not as sound, but as weight in the air. The wardrobe walls drew closer, or maybe that was his lungs tightening. The mirror's placement directly across from the wardrobe seam turned the world outside into a thin strip of reflection, a ribbon of light that pulled a ghost of movement into his small dark. She stopped in front of the mirror. He knew because the light stilled. because he could hear the delicate whisper of fabric as she turned her head, inspecting the planes of her face. The clink of jewelry, the sigh again, but lower, longer. He pressed his tongue to the roof of his mouth to keep from swallowing, because sometimes a swallow sounds like a confession. Sweat beaded along his lip and tasted sour when it broke and ran to the corner of his mouth. She leaned close to the mirror. He could tell by the way the perfume deepened and the way the floorboard under the mirror knocked softly into the world. She didn't speak for a long moment. Then, barely above breath, "Don't make mistakes." And then lower, the sound a blade makes when you turn it slowly in your hand. Not with this one. A cold river ran down Jabari's back. The vial pressed its cold through his hoodie as if to say, "I'm here." The phone in his pocket marked time with the faintest hum of background recording, a tiny heartbeat made of electricity and need. Her tone changed. He had heard it before. The switch. The event where truth puts on a dress and calls itself something else. She laughed lightly. "Traffic," she said to no one, or to the mirror, or to the person she would no doubt call next. Always worse when you need to be somewhere. For 2 seconds, it sounded like any woman annoyed at the world. For him, the words piled onto the other words she had said at midnight and turned the room into a mouth that wanted to swallow him. She smoothed her hair. Lipstick clicked into place. He imagined that scarlet curve shining in the mirror, the same curve as the smile in the living room photograph. He imagined that smile over a glass, over a toast, over a finish. Her hand paused. The wardrobe, with its narrow seam, gave him a sliver of her eye in the mirror. The eye was a dark lake without moon. He went very still. He thought of his mother's steady gaze and placed it between himself and the darkness coming through that sliver. He prayed, not with words, but with the frantic rhythm of a bird inside a cage. The eye moved on. She stepped back. The room widened by an inch, and he drank that inch like air. The handbag strap slid onto her shoulder. The heel taps moved toward the door. She stopped again, only to adjust the angle of a framed picture on the dresser, her own face smiling too wide for a human mouth. He bit the inside of his cheek until iron bloomed across his tongue. A text tone chirped from her phone, 3 soft notes that felt like a hand tugging her away. "I'm coming," she said, voice warm as if love lived at the other end. The door to the guest room sighed open, then closed. The hallway received her steps. The front door opened, closed. The house exhaled. Jabari stayed inside the dark until the dark lost its edges. He counted to 100, then 2. His legs trembled when he pushed the wardrobe door a few inches. The room greeted him with light that felt too naked. His knees threatened to give. He pressed his palm to the dresser to arrest the sway. The mirror threw back a boy with a sheen of sweat and a mouth too tight for his age. He hated how frightened he looked. He hated that fear had made him smaller. He hated that in this house, to be careful was to live. He moved back into the living room because he needed to see that he hadn't imagined any of this. The bag was gone. The light on the wall struck the space where his mother's face used to rest and made the paint look thinner, like the wall remembered being more than it was. The clock kept on. The house returned to its old song, as if it hadn't just hidden a child inside a wooden mouth. He lifted his hoodie, checked the pocket. The vial lay in the fabric's hollow, indifferent to the sweat it had helped conjure. He set it gently on the coffee table and stared. Moonlight would catch it differently later. Now, afternoon sun turned its liquid the color of weak honey. He brought the glass close to his nose. Nothing. He touched the stopper. Secure. He thought of science class, of Mr. Bika's grave kindness when explaining how something you can't see can still be the most powerful thing in the room. He remembered the bright strip of paper that changed color in different solutions. He remembered the word catalyst and how a small thing could tip a whole reaction into fire. His phone screen, still warm, showed the new pictures in a row, one after the other. Glass, light. His fingers shaking at the edges. He attached one to a draft message he did not send. Not yet. He took the vial again and turned it between thumb and forefinger, watching the bubble rise lazily and then settle at the top like a sleeping eye. A tremor passed through him so strong he had to sit. Through the window, he saw the street run its ordinary river. A man pushed a cart of oranges. A girl laughed into a phone. A dog slept in a wedge of shade. In the glass of the window, he also saw himself sitting with a thing too big to hold. The reflection of the living room photograph, Naletti's smile, hovered near his shoulder like a saint in the wrong church. He stood, and with a motion that surprised him with its steadiness, he turned that photograph face down. The frame sighed against the table. Dust lifted where it had not dared to before. He brought the vial to his chest. Its cold kissed his racing heart. He listened for sirens that did not come, for the return of heels that he feared would, for his father's key that he wished would turn and fill the rooms with an adult certainty that could save them. He heard only the clock, steady as a drum in a march you don't want to join but are already in. He thought of what would come next and knew there was no clean way through. He would have to show someone. He would have to speak a truth that would turn the man he loved against him before it saved him. He would have to become, at 13, the kind of person who does what is right even when the world calls it wrong because it stings. He slid the vial back into his pocket and felt its outline print itself into him. His breath, still thin, began to widen, one careful inhale at a time. He went to his room and took down the photograph of his mother, lifting it so it met the sun without glare. "I found something," he whispered, the words small and raw. The glass of the frame made his voice sound far away, like a message sent across a lake. "I don't know how to carry it." A car slowed outside. He flinched, holding the photo and his breath together. The car rolled on. Across the hall, the guest room mirror stared at no one, but he could feel its memory of the woman who had looked at herself like a rival she meant to defeat. His phone, tucked under his pillow when nights were dangerous, blinked its tiny light. The recorder file showed a spike at the moment the wardrobe creaked, another at the place where her voice had said, "Don't make mistakes." He played it back at the lowest possible volume. Her whisper ran over his skin like a chill draft under a door. He stopped it fast. It was enough. Too much. He sat on the edge of the bed and held the photo in the pocket at the same time, one hand on memory, one hand on evidence, and realized the line he had crossed was not one he could cross back. The house had chosen a side, or maybe it had never had a side at all, only people moving through and laying their claims with laughter and teacups and framed smiles and things that looked like water but were something else. The last light of day slid off the wall and left a softness that made everything feel closer. He lay back, not to rest, but because the weight of standing with so much in your pocket is hard. The mattress took him the way a boat takes a body, carefully, with a promise that cannot guarantee safety. He curled around the cold at his hip, like you might curl around a candle you fear and need. Somewhere in the city, sirens finally cried, thin and far. Somewhere in his chest, a decision hardened the way sugar hardens when heat leaves the room. He closed his eyes and saw the ribbon of mirror light, the unlit eye. The way her smile didn't belong to any joy he knew. He saw his father's face lift in trust and then break. He saw himself standing between. He spoke without opening his eyes, the syllables barely dust. "I'm holding a door open, and hell is on the other side." The clock answered with its patient tick, 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 as if it had always known this moment would come. He pressed his palm to the pocket where Glass slept, and for the first time since his mother's picture was taken down, he felt something that might be purpose, or might be terror learning how to stand upright. He did not know which. He only knew that the house, the photos, the perfume, the mirror, the heartbeat of a small red light, all of it had shifted him into a place where boys are not allowed to be boys. He let out one long breath. It tasted like copper and promise. The air grew colder, or maybe he did. He held still, listening for a car that might stop, a key that might turn, a laugh that might lie. He heard only the simple, stubborn music of time going forward, whether you ask it to or not. The bottle hit the table with a sharp click, glass against wood. Jabari's small hand trembled as he pushed it forward, his chest rising and falling like he had run miles though he had only crossed the hall. "She wants to kill you," he whispered. His throat burned, but the words came out clear, almost foreign in their strength. Adewale looked down. His broad shoulders stiffened, the deep lines of his face sharpening, as if carved deeper by disbelief. He had just returned from a long day, tie loosened, jacket tossed across the chair. The smell of cologne mixed with the faint bitterness of office smoke still clung to him. He turned his gaze to his son, then to the vial, then back again. "Enough, Jabari," he said, voice heavy with warning. Jabari shook his head violently, hair falling into his eyes. "No, father, you don't understand. I found this in her bag. She talks on the phone at night. She said after the wedding night, you would die." The words, so blunt and raw, echoed in the room. The light bulb above flickered, as if even the electricity recoiled. Adewale's hand slammed the table. The vial jumped, his voice thundered. "Do not speak about her that way. Your mother is gone. She is gone, Jabari. And I am trying to live again. Don't you see?" Jabari's lips parted, but no sound came. His father's eyes glistened, not with tears, but with fury and weariness that blended into one. "You hate her," Adewale continued, each word a hammer. "You hate that she makes me smile again. You hate that she brings light where there has only been darkness. That's what this is. Jealousy, immaturity." Jabari wanted to scream. He wanted to shake him, to shove the evidence into his father's hands and force him to look. But he stood still, small against the roar of a man who would not see. His father reached out, snatched the vial, and without hesitation hurled it into the trash can. The sound of breaking, plastic against metal, glass muffled by paper, rang in Jabari's ears like a verdict. A silence followed, the kind that crushes. "Go to your room," Adewale said, his tone low now, wounded but unbending. "I will not hear another word of this." Jabari's knees almost buckled. The world blurred at the edges. He turned, not trusting his voice, and walked down the hall. Behind him, his father's heavy sigh carried through the walls like a door slamming. But the boy was not finished. He waited. He listened for the familiar rhythm of his father's steps retreating into the bedroom. He listened for the dull click of the door shutting, the slow, defeated shift of weight on the mattress. Then he crept back, bare feet silent against the cool floor. The trash can stood there, half full of papers and wrappers and the vial glinting faintly through. He reached in, pulled it free. Cold again. Cold as if it had been waiting for him. This time he held it tighter, the smooth glass biting into his palm. He thought of his mother's eyes in the old photograph, the steady comfort there, and it gave him the courage to act. At school the next day, he waited until the last bell, until the crowd of students thinned and the teachers moved about like tired guardians. He slipped into the science lab where Mr. Baker, tall and thin with graying temples, was organizing bottles of clear liquids along the counter. "Sir?" Jabari said, breathless, holding the vial forward with two hands. "Please, I need your help." Mr. Baker looked down, his brow furrowed. He reached for the vial, turned it in his hand, studied the missing label. His eyes darkened. "Where did you get this?" Jabari shook his head. "I can't tell, but it's important. Please test it." The teacher hesitated, then nodded. He poured a few drops onto a strip of treated paper. Instantly, the strip flared to a deep violet, veins of poison blooming across its surface. Jabari's breath caught in his throat. Mr. Bika's expression hardened. "This is no medicine," he murmured. "It is deadly. A single drop could end a life in minutes." The words landed like stones. Jabari's knees wobbled, but he gripped the desk for strength. "Do not touch it again with bare skin," the teacher said. He fetched a small container, sealed a sample inside, and scribbled notes with swift, urgent strokes. Then he tore a sheet from his pad, signed his name, and handed the page to Jabari. "This is my statement. Keep it safe. I will hold a portion of the sample in case the truth must be proved." The boy stared at the paper. His fingers trembled as he folded it, slipped it into his pocket. His heart pounded not with fear now, but with a fierce, fragile determination. When he stepped out of the lab, the afternoon light stung his eyes. He walked down the empty corridor, clutching his backpack as though it contained his entire world. The floor gleamed under the weak sun, and each footstep echoed like a pledge. "If Father will not believe," he whispered to himself, "then the world will." The words tasted bitter and strong. He thought of his father's face twisted with anger. He thought of Nalady's hollow smile, the way her eyes never warmed. He thought of the whisper in the night, the name Mandla, the laughter that followed a death sentence. The paper crinkled against his palm. The vial weighed his pocket. The photo of his mother lingered in his mind, her gaze steady, urging him forward. He walked home under a sky bruised with clouds, each step heavy with the knowledge that the path ahead would not be straight. Yet he did not waver. For the first time since his mother's death, he felt something deeper than grief, sharper than fear. He felt purpose. That night, he sat at his desk with the lamp burning low. He pulled out the paper signed by his teacher, laid it beside his phone, and set the vial in front of him. 3 objects, small and ordinary, but together, they were more than evidence. They were his only weapons in a war he had never chosen. He touched the photograph of his mother, whispering as if she might hear, "I'll protect him, even if he hates me for it." The house groaned with its old wood. A laugh echoed faintly from the living room, Nalady's laugh, light and sweet, but now Jabari heard only the blade inside it. He pressed his palm hard against the evidence in front of him, anchoring himself against the tide. His eyes burned, but he would not cry. He could not afford tears anymore. What he carried was heavier than sorrow. It was truth, and truth, he knew now, was dangerous. The lamp flickered, shadows stretching long across his desk. His chest rose and fell. The clock ticked. Outside, thunder muttered low in the sky. And in that charged silence, Jabari made a vow that trembled like a flame, yet refused to die. The camera flash caught them first, a pair of lovers, hands entwined, heads bent close across the dim café table. Nalady's face glowed in the soft amber light, her smile wider than any Jabari had seen at home. Beside her sat a man with sharp features, eyes glinting like polished stone. Mandla. Jabari's breath fogged the glass window he hid behind. His pulse thundered in his ears. He had followed her from the house, keeping far enough back to disappear into crowds, ducking behind street stalls, clinging to shadows until she slipped into this café with its low lamps and thick smell of roasted beans. He hadn't expected to find her waiting for someone. He hadn't expected to see the kiss she leaned into, quick but sure, like 2 people who had long rehearsed the shape of each other's mouths. Jabari lifted his phone, hands shaking, lens pressed against the window. The shutter snapped soundlessly. Picture after picture captured the impossible scene. Nalady's ringless hand resting on Mandla's, her head tilted in trust, his whisper brushing her ear. Each photo burned like fire into the boy's memory. He pressed record. The screen glowed red. His phone trembled, but his resolve did not. Inside, Mandla leaned back, voice low but steady. "After the ceremony, the accounts will be unlocked. Your signature will open every door. We'll have more than enough to clear what I owe and start over." Nalady's eyes shone with greed, though her lips curved into affection. No more debts, no more waiting. By the end of that night, it will all be ours. He won't stand in our way. Mandla's hand tightened on hers. The glass must be his last. Jabari's stomach nodded. The phone recorded, catching every poisoned syllable. The cafe clattered around them with spoons against cups, chairs shifting, music humming faintly from the speaker above. But in Jabari's ears, only their voices existed. He edged closer, careful not to let the waiter passing nearby see the small boy at the window. His breath left marks on the cold pane. He wiped them quickly, fear clawing at him. If they looked up, if they saw him— Naledi laughed then, the sound bright and tender, so different from the shadow she wore at home. It's poetic, isn't it? A wedding toast to end a man's life. Her words slid into Jabari's bones like knives. He almost dropped the phone, but he forced himself to stay, to listen, to capture. The twist came fast. The cafe door opened and the draft of air carried in a young waiter, balancing a tray of cups. He glanced around, his gaze sweeping past the window where Jabari crouched. Then he paused. The boy froze. The waiter's brow furrowed. He stepped closer, curiosity flickering in his eyes. Panic surged. Jabari ducked low, pressing against the stone wall. The waiter came nearer, now only a breath away from discovering him. But then a voice from inside called, "Cabello, 2 more lattes!" The young man turned, distracted, and hurried back into the bustle. Jabari exhaled shakily, his whole body trembling. He had escaped discovery by a heartbeat. Inside, Mandla pushed his chair back, voice urgent. "We can't meet here again. Too many eyes." Naledi touched his hand once more before rising. "Don't worry. Soon, eyes won't matter. Soon, all of this will be ours." They left the cafe, stepping into the night, their silhouettes merging with the crowd. Jabari darted away, pressing himself into the shadows of a side street until their figures disappeared. His phone screen glowed. The red light of recording had caught everything. The pictures, the words, the proof. But proof alone was not enough. He knew it now, after his father's fury, after being called jealous and immature. He needed someone who would listen, someone who could turn truth into action. He thought of Miss Amina, the young lawyer who had once spoken at his school about justice, her words carrying weight that made even restless students still their fidgeting. She was known in the community, trusted. She had a fire in her voice that made lies shrivel. Jabari's fingers tapped quickly. He attached the photos of the vial, the images from the cafe, the recording from his science teacher's test, and now this, the voice of betrayal. He added a short message. "Please help me. He doesn't believe me. They will kill him. This is proof." He hit send. The screen dimmed. The night pressed close. From the distance came the murmur of traffic, the bark of a stray dog, the laughter of strangers. But inside Jabari, silence stretched heavy, punctuated only by the echo of Naledi's words. The glass must be his last. He stepped into the streetlight, pale glow brushing his face. For a moment he looked older than his 13 years, burden carved deep into his expression. When he reached home, the windows glowed warm with light. He could hear his father's voice softened with wine and contentment, Naledi's laughter threading sweetly through. Jabari stood outside listening, the evidence burning in his pocket, his chest tight with fear and determination. He pushed the door open slowly. The house smelled of roasted meat and spices, rich and inviting. His father sat at the table, smiling in a way that crushed Jabari's heart. Naledi looked up, her smile flawless, her eyes sharp. For a flicker of a second, he thought she saw through him, straight into his pocket where her doom now rested. But she only said, "There you are, darling, come eat." Jabari sat down, the phone heavy against his thigh, his hands trembling as he reached for the spoon. Across from him, Naledi's laughter rose again, sweet and hollow. His father joined in, oblivious. Jabari tasted nothing. Every bite was ash. His gaze slid to the wine glasses gleaming on the table. The image from the cafe replayed in his mind. The glass must be his last. The clock ticked. The meal continued. His secret sat between them, unspoken but sharp, like a blade waiting for the moment to cut. And as the night closed in, Jabari's eyes stung with tears he could not shed. He knew he had proof. He knew he had sent it to someone who might save them. Yet in this room, with his father's blind smile and Naledi's haunting gaze, he felt smaller than ever, trapped in a house where truth was invisible. He looked at his father, love and fear tangling in his chest, and thought, "How do I save you from the person you love?" The question pressed into him like a stone he could not lift, a weight that would follow him into tomorrow, into the wedding, into the moment when glass met lips. The hall roared with applause as the bride entered. 1,000 tiny crystals rained down from the chandeliers, scattering light like a shower of frozen stars. The white silk of Naledi's gown caught every shimmer, glowing as though she had been carved from the very brilliance above. She walked slowly, each step measured, her veil trailing like a river of innocence behind her. Jabari's nails dug into his palms as he stood at the edge of the crowd, his chest squeezed tighter with each cheer, each flash of a camera. His father stood waiting at the altar, eyes wet with pride, lips trembling with awe. He looked at Naledi as though salvation itself approached. The music swelled. Naledi's smile spread, perfect, dazzling, yet behind the lace veil, her eyes flickered once, quick, sharp, a glance toward the shadows of the hall where Mandla sat hidden among the guests. Jabari caught it. His stomach turned to stone. The ceremony moved forward in a haze of laughter and blessings. Words of love poured from lips that Jabari knew carried poison. The priest spoke of unity, of eternal bonds, of the beauty of trust. Every word felt like a blade pressed into Jabari's skin. He wanted to scream. He wanted to rush forward, grab his father's sleeve, and drag him away. But he held back, waiting, watching. At last the moment came. The feast began. Tables groaned beneath silver platters, goblets gleamed with rich red wine, and the guests lifted their glasses in joy. Naledi's laughter rang high, sweet, and clear as crystal, and her hand brushed Adewale's with practiced tenderness. She lifted a goblet, her ring flashing like a flare. Her eyes slid once more toward Mandla. A message passed in silence. Then she leaned close to Adewale, her voice soft enough to disappear under the noise. "To us, my love, to forever." She pressed the glass into his hand. Jabari's heart exploded in his chest. Sweat broke across his forehead. He saw the rim of the goblet shine in the candlelight. He saw his father's lips begin to part. He couldn't wait any longer. "Don't drink!" The shout tore from him, raw, shrill, slicing through the laughter and chatter. The hall fell silent in a heartbeat. All eyes turned. Naledi's smile froze, then trembled at the edge of collapse. Adewale stared, stunned, glass hovering inches from his mouth. Guests murmured. Some chuckled nervously. A boy crying wolf on his father's wedding day. Whispers rose like smoke. Jealous, unhinged. Poor child still grieving. Jabari pushed through the tables, stumbling, his breath ragged. He pointed at the goblet, voice cracking but fierce. "It's poison. She wants to kill you." Laughter erupted now, cruel and dismissive. A few guests shook their heads, pity on their faces. Adewale's expression shifted from shock to fury, his cheeks flushing deep. "Enough, Jabari." But Jabari didn't stop. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the strip of treated paper his teacher had given him, the one that revealed truth with color. His hands shook as he dipped it into the wine. For a breathless second, nothing happened. Then, before the entire room, the paper bled into a deep, unnatural purple, the color of danger, the color of death. The hall gasped, glasses froze mid-air. Adewale's hand trembled so violently the goblet spilled, dark liquid splattering across the white tablecloth like blood. Naledi's face cracked. For the first time, the mask slipped. Her eyes hardened. Her lips twitched with fury barely caged. In the silence that followed, her hollow smile fell away completely, revealing not innocence, but hunger. Jabari stood trembling, the strip of poisoned paper held high like a banner of war. His chest heaved, His throat burned, his eyes glistened with tears that refused to fall. The twist hit him from the crowd. Laughter came again, but this time strained, brittle. Some guests whispered that the boy had planted it, that grief had driven him to madness, that no bride would bring poison to her own wedding feast. A few muttered prayers, uncertain. The weight of disbelief pressed on him like chains, even as the truth glowed purple before their eyes. Adawale's face crumpled with conflict. He stared at his son, then at the woman he had chosen to replace a ghost, and his hand trembled as though he held the future itself. Naledi's voice returned, honey over knives. This is absurd, a child's trick. Can we not have peace even for one night? But her eyes, locked with Jabari's, told another story. They were sharp, seething, promising vengeance. The guests shifted, uneasy. Some clapped awkwardly, trying to smooth over the chaos. Others sat frozen, staring at the boy who had just shattered the night. Jabari's breath came ragged. He wanted to collapse, to hide, to escape the ocean of eyes upon him. But he stayed. His gaze never left Naledi. The evidence stained the paper in his hand, proof undeniable, though belief still hung in the balance. And then came the silence, heavy, pressing, waiting for someone to decide what was real. Adawale lowered the goblet, his hand shaking. He stared at the wine-stained cloth, at the boy who had risked everything, at the woman whose eyes no longer pretended. The hall seemed to lean in, holding its breath. Jabari's chest burned with hope and dread all at once. He had shown the truth. He had unmasked the lie. But would it be enough? The clock above the hall ticked, echoing louder than the applause had minutes before. Each tick was a hammer striking into Jabari's heart. And there, in the stunned silence of a ruined wedding feast, a boy stood small but unbroken, facing the hollow smile of a woman who had finally let her mask fall. The hall had seen, the father had seen, the world could not unsee. Yet still the question hung in the air, heavy as stone. Would love blind a man more than poison could kill him? The hall buzzed with confusion. Forks clattered, chairs scraped, whispers surged like waves in a storm. In the center, a boy stood with a strip of poisoned paper bleeding purple in his hand, his voice shaking as he shouted for his father not to drink. All around him, laughter had curdled into unease. Guests no longer looked at the feast, they looked at Naledi. She didn't falter. Not yet. Her smile reappeared, brittle but still shimmering, as if sheer performance could pull the night back under her control. She raised her hand and let out a soft laugh. "Children's tricks," she said sweetly. A little game he must have cooked up in school. But her eyes betrayed her. They darted, sharp, calculating toward the doors, toward Mandla hidden among the crowd. Jabari knew he had only seconds before the room swallowed his truth whole. His hands fumbled for his phone. With one trembling motion, he opened the recorder. The red triangle glowed, and suddenly the café voices filled the grand hall. Naledi's voice first. "After the ceremony, the accounts will be unlocked." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Then Mandla's, "The glass must be his last." The words rang out, clear, undeniable. Conversations collapsed into stunned silence. Wine glasses wavered in mid-air, some slipping from fingers and shattering across the marble. Naledi's smile shattered too. She lunged forward, her hand clawing for the phone. "Stop this nonsense!" she screamed, her voice breaking its practiced sweetness. But before she could snatch it, strong arms caught her. Uniforms flooded the hall. Officers pushed through the stunned guests, their boots pounding against the floor. Amina's voice called above the commotion, firm and sharp. "This boy came to me. I sent the evidence. You all heard it just now. This is no child's fantasy." Naledi thrashed, her veil slipping, her gown tearing at the seams as she struggled like a trapped predator. "It's lies, all of it, lies!" But truth had already entered the room, and it would not leave. Mandla bolted from his seat, his chair crashing to the ground. He shoved through guests, knocking plates and glasses, making for the exit. An officer caught his arm. He twisted, fought, punched, but the crowd had shifted. Gasps turned into shouts, guests grabbing, blocking his path. He fell under a weight of hands and uniforms. Naletti's scream split the air as steel cuffs locked around her wrists. The sound wasn't grief. It was rage, guttural, inhuman. Adewale stood frozen at the altar. His face had drained of all color, his eyes wide, his mouth opening and closing, but giving no sound. His hands hung at his sides, trembling as though trying to remember what to do. And then something broke inside him. He stumbled forward toward his son, toward the boy who still clutched the phone like a weapon. His steps were heavy, but his arms were strong when he reached out and pulled Jabari into him. The boy collapsed against his chest, shaking with sobs he had held back for too long. "You saved me," Adewale whispered, his voice cracked, heavy with both shame and gratitude. "My son, you saved me." The guests stared. No one laughed now. No one dared call the boy jealous or foolish. They had heard the voices. They had seen the evidence. Truth lay bleeding purple across the tablecloth and ringing from the boy's phone. Naletti's screams grew distant as she was dragged through the door, her hollow smile gone, her eyes blazing with venom. Mandla's curses echoed in the hall, fading as the officers forced him outside. The music had stopped long ago. The chandeliers glittered coldly, reflecting not joy but revelation. And still, Adewale wept into his son's shoulder. For the first time, his tears weren't hidden or restrained. They fell openly, hot and heavy, sliding down Jabari's small neck. The boy clung to him. He had been alone for so long, doubted, dismissed, called jealous, ignored. Now, in front of everyone, his father's arms had returned to him, fierce and unyielding. The hall did not clap. It did not cheer. It watched in silence, struck by the weight of a boy's courage. Jabari closed his eyes, pressing his face into the broad chest he thought he had lost. But even in that moment of fragile relief, a thought pierced him like a blade. He had stopped the glass from touching his father's lips. He had unmasked the lies. But truth had only begun its work. Because lies rarely die quietly. Outside the hall, Naletti's screams echoed one last time before the doors slammed shut. And Jabari, trembling in his father's arms, asked himself the question that would not rest. If love blinded my father once, could it blind him again? The gavel struck like thunder. The courtroom stilled, every breath held hostage by the sound. Naledi stood between two guards, her once immaculate beauty frayed by the weeks behind bars. The veil of her wedding day had been replaced by the gray cloth of a prison uniform, but her eyes still carried the same hollow fire, a blaze that refused to dim even as judgment bore down. Beside her, Mandla's jaw tightened, his lips pressed into a bitter sneer, as if contempt itself could shield him from chains. "Guilty," the judge declared, voice ringing through the chamber. "Conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, attempted homicide." Each word fell like stone upon stone, building a tower that neither Naledi nor Mandla could climb. The murmur of the crowd swelled. Some leaned forward with satisfaction, others whispered prayers, but all eyes turned when the guards led the lovers away. Their shackled steps echoed down the aisle, metal biting into silence. Naledi twisted once, her gaze slicing across the room. She searched for Adewale, perhaps for the son who had broken her masquerade. Her lips moved, forming words no one else could hear. Jabari caught them. "This isn't over." The boy shivered, but he did not look away. For the first time, he didn't feel small beneath her stare. Weeks later, the house stood quiet again. The noise of scandal had faded from the newspapers, leaving only the smell of dust and the echo of footsteps on familiar floors. Adewale and Jabari returned together. The door opened with a creak, the same sound that had always announced both arrival and absence. The living room greeted them with stillness. The walls, once claimed by Naledi's photographs, now bore the solemn beauty of a single portrait. The mother's face restored to its rightful place. Her eyes shone down, steady as ever, a silent witness to what had passed. Jabari paused in front of it. His hand brushed the frame gently as though touching skin. He remembered the night it had been taken down, the hollow space left behind, the way shadows had swallowed his grief. Now, light touched the glass again. For the first time in months, he felt the house breathe. Adewale stood behind him, his large hands restless at his sides. The weight of shame still clung to him, though his eyes had softened. He cleared his throat, the sound thick. "Your mother deserves her place, and so do you." Jabari turned, surprised. His father walked to the old desk and pulled open a drawer. From within, he lifted something wrapped in cloth. Slowly, carefully, he unwrapped it. A watch lay inside. Old, heavy, the leather strap worn, the face scratched by time. Its ticking was faint but steady, a heartbeat preserved across generations. "This belonged to my father," Adewale said quietly, "and to his father before him. I meant to give it to you one day. But you earned it sooner than I ever expected. You carried the weight I refused to see. You saved my life when I would not listen." He pressed the watch into Jabari's hands. The boy's fingers closed around it, the weight surprising him. The tick-tick filled his palm, strong and sure. His chest ached, not with fear this time, but with something deeper, heavier, recognition. He wasn't just a child anymore. He was the keeper of truth, the bearer of a legacy forged in both pain and love. The twist came in the quiet that followed. Adewale's voice broke, softer than Jabari had ever heard it. "I thought love would save me, but it blinded me instead. I thought moving forward meant forgetting. But you reminded me that moving forward means remembering." His eyes filled with tears he didn't hide. He placed a hand on Jabari's shoulder, firm and trembling at once. "Forgive me, son." The boy couldn't speak. His throat closed, his vision blurred. He only nodded, clutching the watch as if it were the last solid thing in the world. They sat together at the old wooden table, the same table where accusations had once shattered trust. Now it bore only 2 glasses of water and the silence of peace. The air was different, lighter, though not yet healed. Healing would take time. But for the first time, time was on their side. Outside, the sky glowed with the faint gold of evening. Shadows stretched long across the yard. The world looked ordinary again, yet nothing inside the house was ordinary anymore. Jabari leaned back, listening to the ticking of the watch. Each beat seemed louder, more certain, filling the gaps where doubt had lived. He thought of his mother's eyes in the photograph, of the truth he had fought to hold when no one else believed. He thought of the night whispers, of the vial cold against his skin, of the purple stain on the wedding table. All of it had led here. The inheritance was not just leather and glass, it was trust reborn, fragile but alive. He looked at his father, whose shoulders still sagged under guilt, but whose arms had finally opened. He looked at the photo, steady and forgiving. And he looked at the watch in his hand, its steady pulse beating like a promise. A question lingered in him, sharp and tender. Would this peace last, or would shadows always find a way back? He closed his eyes, letting the tick-tick anchor him. For now, he chose to believe in the sound. The house was quiet, but not empty anymore. There are moments in life when silence weighs heavier than words, when truth hides in plain sight, yet few dare to speak it. It is in those fragile hours that courage is born, not from grand gestures, but from the trembling voice that refuses to be silenced, from the steady hand that clings to what is right, even when the world laughs in disbelief. The story you have just heard is not only about danger and betrayal, it is about the quiet resilience of the human spirit, the way light insists on breaking through even when shadows seem endless. We are reminded that trust is not something inherited easily, nor is it something given without risk. Trust is forged, again and again, in the fire of trial. It is fragile, it can be broken, yet it can also be restored. And when it is, it becomes stronger than before, like a scar that no longer bleeds but still tells the truth of what has been survived. Life will always test us with disguises. Smiles may hide hollow intentions, words may sound sweet while concealing poison, and love itself can blind as much as it can heal. But deception, no matter how carefully crafted, eventually cracks. Time has a way of exposing what is hidden, and when the mask falls, what remains is not the performance, but the essence of who we truly are. There is a lesson, too, in the stubborn endurance of memory. The past does not vanish because we cover its photographs or replace it with new portraits. Memory lingers, watching, waiting, whispering until the moment it must be heard again. To remember is not to be trapped. To remember is to honor, to carry forward what should never be erased. And perhaps the most tender truth of all is this: love is not blind obedience, nor is it the refusal to see flaws. Real love demands clarity, even when clarity hurts. It demands that we protect one another not only from the dangers outside, but also from the shadows within. It asks us to forgive, but not to forget. It calls us to rise, again and again, to stand for life when silence would be easier. Every generation passes down more than objects or names. What we truly inherit are the choices made before us, the courage that someone else dared to hold, the faith that was rebuilt even after it was shattered. That is the legacy worth keeping. Not wealth, not appearances, not even victory, but the simple, stubborn act of believing in truth. And so, as this story closes, let it not fade into the distance like a dream forgotten at dawn. Carry it with you. Carry its reminder that even the smallest voice can change the course of a life, that trust can be born again in the most unexpected hour, and that courage is often quiet, unseen, until it is most needed. Thank you for walking through this journey, for allowing its shadows and its light to find a place within you. If it moved you, if it stirred questions or gave you something worth reflecting on, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Your reflections keep stories alive long after the final word has been spoken. And if you wish to continue exploring tales of resilience, truth, and the fragile strength of the human heart, we warmly encourage you to follow and subscribe. Each story may end, but another always waits to begin.